interview Dr. Mukund Rajan. The Dr. Mukund Rajan? I asked her again. 2 years at Indian School of Business, ISB, I have read books and articles on brand building, governance systems, and ethical code of conduct. But never did I ever imagine myself interviewing the person who has had a first hand experience working with the Tata Group at several senior positions. Good afternoon, all FICCI Flow members, our Honorable Chairperson Dr. Aarti Gupta, FICCI board members, and our esteemed guest today, Dr. Mukund Rajan. Sir, it is a true honor to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You have been a source of inspiration for many young corporate leaders and senior professionals. In the early 20s, you were the youngest director on the board of major Tata companies, Tata Teleservices Limited and VSNL. No matter what challenges were thrown at you, you always proved your mettle. Dear fellow members, Dr. Mukund Rajan is a person with a bag full of experiences, achievements, and qualifications. He graduated from the BTech program at IIT Delhi in 1989. He received a Rhodes Scholarship to study at Oxford University, where he completed a master's and a doctorate in international relations. He recently authored a book, The Brand Custodian, which was published by HarperCollins in 2019. Dr. Rajan is currently the chairman of eCube Investment Advisors Private Limited, which focuses on environment, social, and governance issues in India. eCube recently announced a partnership in 2019 with Quantum Advisors to invest in the mid-market space in the Indian public markets. Prior to eCube, Dr. Rajan served for 23 whole years with the Tata Group, where he held a plethora of senior executive positions, which included the first brand custodian of the Tata Group, the chief ethics officer of the group, chair of the Tata Global Sustainability Council, member of the Group Executive Council at Tata Sons Limited, head of private equity at Tata Capital, founding managing director and partner of the Tata Opportunities Fund, and managing director of one of the group's listed telecom businesses, Tata Teleservices Maharashtra Limited. He served on the boards of various Tata companies like Tata Teleservices, Tata Communications, Tata AIG, TCS Foundation, and many others. Dr. Rajan serves as the chairperson of the Environment Committee at FICCI. He has also served as the chair of the India 75 Council of the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, and chair of the CII Core Group on China. Among other achievements, in 2007, the World Economic Forum honored Dr. Rajan as a young global leader. Given a little more time, I could go on and on about his achievements. But I believe we must start our event at a drop of a hat. However, I would like to remove some time to mention to you all that for this special event, TIE UP is our outreach partner. I would now like to pass the baton to Dr. Aarti, our chairperson at FICCI Flow Kanpur, to take this even further.
Thank you, Arna. A very good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to FICCI Flow Kanpur's event. A very warm welcome, Dr. Rajan, and we're so happy to have you join us today. Warm welcome to our outreach partner guests from TIE UP and friends and family. They say products are created in factories, but brand is created in the minds and hearts of consumer. No matter the industry, product, customer, or size, a company's brand is its single most important asset. Your brand isn't just your logo, it's how you interact with the world. From your customers to your employees, I think it all stems from your brand. So what do you do with this most important asset? You protect it, you nurture it, and you help it grow. And while protecting and growing may seem two opposing forces, we have with us today Mr. Mukund Rajan, who started as the executive assistant to Mr. Ratan Tata, and over the years, in addition to holding many prestigious positions like Arna mentioned, got promoted as the first brand custodian of the Tata Group. There is no doubt that if there is a brand in India, that is synonymous to trust, to nation building, strength and growth, it is the Tata Group. In little over a decade, from 2000 to 2012, the Tata Group's turnover increased from $10 billion to over $100 billion, and Mr. Rajan was a part of that growth. With over 100 operating companies ranging from salt to steel, from tea to timepieces, the Tata Group is one of the most diversified companies in the world, yet managing to maintain its brand ethics and value. It is our absolute privilege that today we have amongst us Dr. Rajan, who can help us better understand what it takes to build a brand like Tata and the importance of brand ethics in the corporate world. Mr. Rajan, welcome once again.
Thank you so much.
I would like to begin the session by, taking you a couple of decades back, right at the beginning. When you joined the Tata Group in 1995, and were a strong supporting pillar for Tata for 23 years. Please tell us about how this journey began and what was it like being inducted at Mr. Tata's EA to holding one of the most important designations in the company as the Chief Ethics Officer in 2003.
Thank you. And thank you for those very warm introductions and welcomes. Truly appreciate it, and great pleasure to interact with all of you today. So 1995, I just finished my doctorate at Oxford University. And the years that I was away in England from 89 to 94, end of 94, were years obviously of huge change for India. And sort of from overseas, I had noted the dramatic transformation that was beginning to take place in the Indian economy. And I thought I had this one chance to perhaps explore what the corporate world in India looked like, what the Indian economy might offer somebody like me, and sort of dip my feet in the Indian corporate waters, so to speak, by applying to the Tata Administrative Service. And I thought if things didn't really work out in the corporate sector after a year or so, I'd go back into academia. And at that time, thanks to my doctorate, I had a doctoral dissertation, which I was very fortunate to also receive Oxford University Press's consent to publish. And it eventually came out as a book in 1996 called Global Environmental Politics. So I thought going back into academia, if I do it fairly quickly, won't be too difficult because I'll have the book to my name. So I said, I'll give it 2 years. And I wrote into the Tatas, and I was interviewed for the Tata Administrative Service. And that was probably the last time that Ratan Tata was chairing the selection committee for the Tata Administrative Service. He obviously saw something that he noticed in me that he probably liked. And so when I finished the first year of induction with the TAS, as the Tata Administrative Service is called, he offered me a role in his office as his executive assistant. And, for somebody at that age, I was probably 26, to have the opportunity of working in the chairman's office of the Tata Group, India's largest corporate house, and to be able to get a bird's eye view of everything that's changing in India was really a dream come true, because I was interested in understanding better what was happening in the Indian economy. And to do it from the vantage point of the chairman of Tata's was fantastic. So that view that I might spend a couple of years and then go back into academia, one thing led to another. I enjoyed my stint in the corporate sector so much that it just continued for the next 23 years. And I never sort of went back into academia, obviously. In Tata's, I think I was treated extremely well. I was given a number of opportunities at a very young age to be involved in strategy, to be involved in decision making, to work with the chairman of the group, to work with some of the large Tata CEOs, to work with people who are legends, people like Nani Palkiwala. And that was, I guess every young manager's dream come true. And that continued for probably the next 12 years, which is the time I spent with Ratan Tata as his executive assistant. He was somebody and is somebody who I think places a lot of confidence in young people. And so at a very early age, he put me on the boards of some companies. So Tata Teleservices, Tata Communications, and I started rubbing shoulders with some of the senior most Tata people, even though I was fairly young, a little bit of a novice, in fact. But I learned enormously, both by watching things from his office and participating in boards with some of the senior most Tata people. And eventually in 2008, I moved out of his office to become the managing director of one of our listed telecom companies, Tata Teleservices Maharashtra, which was my first experience of interacting with large numbers of stakeholders. We had 3,000 odd employees, around 10,000 feet on street. We had at the time 600,000 shareholders. So, as a listed company, the quarterly reportage, interacting with investors, doing the annual general meetings, all fantastic and novel experiences for a youngster like me. In 2010, I moved out of TTML to become the founding managing partner of the Tata Opportunities Fund. So this is the thing about the Tatas. They often expose young people to unique challenges, things they've never done before. So just as I'd never run a company before being appointed from Mr. Tata's office to be MD of a company, I'd never been involved in the private equity space. And suddenly I was given the opportunity of raising a fairly large fund, India's largest debut private equity fund, in fact, and interacting with some of the largest financiers in the world, the biggest pools of capital, folks like Temasek, the Korea Investment Corporation, and so on. So I raised a $600 million fund whose mandate was quite unique to invest into and alongside the Tata Group. And that continued till 2013. And then in 2013, Cyrus Mistry, who had just been appointed as Mr. Tata's successor in Tata Sons, reached out to me and he said that, the old generation of leaders who worked alongside Mr. Tata, they're all retiring. I need to build a new team. I'm constituting a new group executive council. And I've been asking around in the group and people tell me you're somebody who's spent many years in the group, worked closely with Ratan Tata, understands the ethos. So I'd love for you to join my team and would you be interested? And again, I said, very happy to support you, but what is the role you have in mind? And he said, I'd like you to be the first brand custodian of Tata's. And I said, what does this role entail? Because we never had this role in the past. And he said, listen, as brand custodian, you'll have responsibility for the Tata corporate brand. But in addition, because the brand is built on the twin pillars of good corporate governance and a reputation for ethics, I also want you to become the chairman of our Global Sustainability Council, oversee the CSR work that the Tata companies do. And remember, this is 2013, when the Companies Act was just making CSR spending a commitment and an obligation. 2% of net profits had to go into the space. So he said, I want you to look after that. And because of a reputation for good corporate governance, I want you to serve as a chief ethics officer. And because you'll be overseeing the brand, I also want you to be the chief spokesperson for the group and oversee our media and communication activity, which I thought was unique. I mean, to ask a communications head to also be the ethics in charge is, I think, probably unprecedented in India. Usually you don't want your communications head to be privy to too many secrets and confidentiality. But in Cyrus's case, he thought the brand had to be transparent. And what we stood for was really reflected in these roles. Again, something I'd never done before, like private equity was something I'd never done before. So the minute he mentioned this as a new role, I sort of immediately agreed and said this would be something I would enjoy, something that would add to my portfolio of experiences. And that's the reason I signed up to it. So I served as the brand custodian for the next 4 years with Cyrus. In 2016, you obviously had the very sad and I think quite tragic in my mind events when Ratan Tata and Cyrus Mistry fell out, both individuals that I'd worked very closely with and I have huge respect for. So after Cyrus left, I continued under the next chairman, Chandrasekharan, for 2 more years. I continued as a chief ethics officer. I continued as a chair of a sustainability council. I was also given a portfolio of looking after international offices. I was placed on some boards. But in 2018, I think I came to a point where I felt that I'd done all that I could with the Tata Group. And it was time for me to see if I could make a new and different contribution elsewhere. And this is the point when I thought a lot was changing in India, both in corporate governance and environmental concerns, in particular concerns around global warming and climate change. In some ways, this takes me back to my doctoral dissertation on the politics of the environment and global environmental issues like climate change. And I felt that this was something that I would really want to spend the next few years of my life and my career focused on. So in 2018, after I left Tata's, a group of us, including some ex-colleagues from Tata's, set up a company called eCube. The name, as it suggests, is drawn from the three E's: engage and empower for ESG. ESG is this new mantra of investing around the world, a focus on environment, social, and good corporate governance to really deliver value for stakeholders. And that's really what now in this next phase of my career, I'm going to be focused on doing, working with companies, mostly mid-market companies, trying to help them to improve their ESG performance. So that's a quick sort of sketch of my career graph and the things that I've done over the last 25 years now.
Wow, sir. What a full circle I feel like, right from your doctoral dissertation to bagging all this experience of 23 years with the Tatas and back to working with companies, improve their ESG and at eCube. I think you've got like some fabulous experience under your belt.
I feel very, very blessed. I mean, in some ways it's sort of connecting the dots. Very often in your career, you don't necessarily realize what different experiences are setting you up for. But later, when you look back, it all seems to make sense and you can sort of discern patterns and continuity. So I feel very blessed.
So when we feel blessed to hear from you about your experiences. So thank you once again. My next question is, hiring the right people, a uniformity of culture, they're big contributing factors for business growth. This is one of the biggest challenges for companies, so huge, and is also one of the biggest contributing factors to brand building. How has the Tata Group been successful in doing this and establishing the sense of ownership to each and every employee's, within each and every employee's DNA?
So first, let me just quickly mention there's a very stirring video that you can easily access on YouTube. It's a talk given by Professor Rohit Deshpande of the Harvard Business School, where he looks at what was the attitude of employees at the Taj Mahal Hotel when the terror attacks took place in 2008. And it's incredible the way he tells the story that you have a bunch of close to 600 odd employees in this hotel, the flagship hotel of the Indian Hotels Company, which is part of the Tata Group. And on the night when the terror attacks took place, when many of these employees would have found it very easy to flee for their lives, escape from some of the back exits that they knew so well and intimately, they all chose to stay and to protect their customers and their guests. So I think that tells you the story of the kind of commitment and passion many Tata employees have had over the years in sort of working for their companies, working for a cause that they believe is bigger than themselves, bigger than just what a monthly salary would sort of mean in most people's lives. So I think it goes back in Tata's case really to the foundations of the group and what the group's original founding fathers felt was the role of business. So if you go back to our founder, Jamsetji Tata, he has this famous quote, which you'll see in many Tata offices and buildings and factories, where he said, in a free enterprise, the community is not just another stakeholder in business, but is in fact the very purpose of its existence. So what he meant was, without a successful community, without successful customers, without successful investors, without successful employees, you can't really build a flourishing business. So you have to carry everyone with you. Over time, his founding philosophy, which also saw Tata setting up some institutions of national repute, think of the what used to be the Indian Institute of Science, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, the National Center for the Performing Arts, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, alongside many of these contributions to the nation, were powerful industries in spaces like power. Think of a company like Tata Power, which provided Mumbai some of its early energy needs. Think of Tata Motors, Tata Steel. So he really sort of set the stage for Tatas to enter areas and sectors of nation building. And over the years, it morphed into what was subsequently came to be known as the trusteeship concept, where the original founders of Tatas eventually bequeathed all their wealth to trusts, which are today the two largest Tata trusts, Tata Charities, the Sir Ratan Tata Trust and the Sir Dorab Tata Trust. And these trusts between them control around 2/3 of the equity of the holding company, Tata Sons. So because of this movement of holding and equity into charities, you eventually have a group that is ultimately held at the investment holding company level by charities. What this does for employees then is then to give them a sense that the work that they do, the profits that they generate, the surpluses the businesses create, which then get paid out as dividends ultimately to the holding company, all goes back towards good work in society. So think of it as an employee of a company, if you feel that what you do has a larger purpose, you're that much more aligned with the objectives of the management, with the kind of vision that the chairman of the group and others may lay out from time to time. So I think that has played a huge role in creating a bonding, a sense of ownership and pride in the employees, and indeed a long-term commitment. You often hear of Tata employees who spent their entire careers just working for one company, retiring from that company, and then their children and sometimes their grandchildren also working for the same company. If you go to Jamshedpur in Tata Steel, you'll see this with many, many families where the third generation or even the fourth generation is now working for the group. So I think what helps is a sense from the promoters, the founders, of what it means to be part of the organization, a mission statement that makes employees feel that there is a connect, ideally an emotional connect to the organization, that then translates into the kind of contribution and give back to society that makes them feel that the work is really worth doing. I think India, if you look at some of the Gallup surveys, has some of the lowest levels of employee engagement around the world. But that can change if you instill in your employees a sense of pride, a sense of shared participation in building the future. I think Tatas have been very fortunate, and they've been blessed by leadership at the top, right from the founding father, that has allowed them to keep that flock together. It's becoming more difficult, I have to tell you, because employees these days are more short-term oriented. The group has obviously also had some setbacks in terms of reputation and governance, but all this can be addressed providing the fundamental building blocks are put in place.
Okay. So true, sir. Carrying everyone is the key. And, you can see that in every project that Tata does. My next question to is, a brand as big as Tata's attracts both positive and negative press. The Tatas have had their own share of controversies, right from Mr. Mistri's quitting to the Tata Finance scandal to the more recent Tanish controversy. What has been the company's policy to mitigate or manage these controversies? I feel, moreover, do you think keeping the brand image is more difficult in these times, with all the social media on a rampant rage, with tweets flying out? Do you think managing a brand ethics or maintaining a brand image is more difficult in these times?
Oh, absolutely. It is much, much harder now than it ever used to be. You're literally in a fishbowl where everyone can see you. There is constant scrutiny, and there's instant reaction, instant feedback thanks to social media and social media networks. And people are empowered in a way they never were before. If you have a customer who's irate, they can post something nasty on LinkedIn, put it out on Twitter, make it go viral really fast. So I think the kinds of pressures that corporates, not just Tata's, face today is of a significantly higher magnitude than anything that we've ever seen before in our lives. So therefore, you also have to be much more nimble and much more responsive. What helps, I think, is if you have a brand that has over time sort of established some core values and people believe that they can trust those values and really relate to that brand, then you have a much better chance of defending yourself even when things go wrong. And things will inevitably go wrong. You can never control 100% of the people 100% of the time. There'll be some bad eggs, sometimes mistakes, genuine mistakes that people can make, even your leaders will make. But you can bounce back if you have a fundamentally strong brand. And very importantly, if you have values that people really align with, recognize, and are willing to give you a second chance, so to speak. But you have to be very quick on your feet in responding to criticism. I think in many companies, including in Tata's, very often when you have a crisis or you have a problem, the first effort, too often, unfortunately, tends to be to try and suppress the bad news, try and solve it outside the public eye, try and brush it under the carpet, try and hope public memory is short, people will forget and will move on. But I found, and I think in Tata's, we found that more often than not, if you confront the problem, and sometimes if you made a genuine mistake, you honestly accept it, take it on the chin and move on, people usually give you credit for that because too few companies actually are willing to do that. So I think more often than not, I think the best answer in a crisis is accept if things have gone wrong, try and offer a solution, but be very quick to respond and communicate. Don't try and hide and don't try and brush it under the carpet. Unfortunately, bad news has a way of finding its way out. And in the public eye, if you're seen to be suppressing information, then you come out looking much worse than perhaps you need to.
That's some great advice, sir. Be honest, confront the problem, and be quick in retaliation. I would now request Arna to ask the next set of questions.
So, as far as I know, and I've read in so many articles and I've seen it for myself, brand building and sustaining it is very, very difficult. On your promotion as a chief ethics officer, as by Mr. Cyrus Mistry himself, he had given you an ambitious agenda that the Tata brand name should touch a quarter of the world's population and it should become the 25th most admired brand in the world by 2025. So how did you go about building a brand, and what were your main strategies in building Tata as a global brand? And were the strategies different from that of building a brand within India?
So I think very good question. In fact, for many Indian companies that are now going global, I think it's a big question. How do you build a brand outside your home market? So when I became brand custodian, I think we were clear that the brand in India was very strong. We were being repeatedly rated by agencies like Interbrand or Brand Finance as the most powerful Indian corporate house by a long margin. I think the closest competitors were players like Bharti and Reliance, but much behind us as a brand. So we didn't really have too much of an issue. And in India, the advantage we had is through almost a century and a half, because Tata Sons was essentially created in 1868, we'd had the benefit of being amongst the top 10 players in the Indian market for every decade of our existence. And we had a very strong sort of community of support. We also had products that were touching the lives of hundreds of millions of Indians. Think of products like Tata Salt. Almost every Indian at some point or the other has sampled salt. So as a group, I mean, we talk about salt to software. So whether it is the employment we provide, whether it is the products that we put on the market, we didn't really have an issue in terms of brand salience, awareness, visibility for Tata in India. Overseas is a much bigger problem because relatively few people in some of our key markets of interest had heard about Tata's or knew really the entire Tata story and what we stood for. And this really was brought home in a big way to me when we'd done some surveys in companies that we'd acquired in Europe. So let me give you an example of Jaguar Land Rover. We'd acquired this company in 2007, 2008 by Tata Motors. And in 2013, when I interacted with some of the employees at Jaguar Land Rover, it was actually quite stunning to understand from them that most of them didn't have a clue who ran Tata Sons, who ran the Tata Group, what was Tata's reputation in India. All that they knew was Tata's was the latest in a series of buyers beyond players like Ford and BMW and others. So it became clear that the employees didn't necessarily relate to Tata's in the same way that our Indian employees would or did. So I think the important thing was first to educate your own people about who you are and what you stand for. And we started doing this by ensuring that our overseas entities were fully involved in many of the initiatives that we were driving from India. I think one of the big ones at that time in 2014, we were celebrating the 175th birth anniversary of our founder, Jamsetji Tata. And so we created this group-wide volunteering program, and we made sure all our overseas employees participated in that. Similarly, in 2015, when we revamped the Tata Code of Conduct, it gave us an opportunity to include all our foreign employees in the way in which we thought about putting out the new Code of Conduct, the kind of training we offered all the employees, the kind of awareness building sessions that we conducted. So I think it's very important to tell your story to your own people first. Your employees are going to be your biggest and best brand champions. If you don't sort that out, then forget about influencing or impressing the rest of your stakeholder community. Once you've done that, then you start looking for other opportunities to create visibility for your brand. And in Tata's case, in the UK market, where we became, in fact, the largest industrial employer after acquisition of Chorus and British Steel and Jaguar Land Rover, we felt that we needed to position ourselves as a sort of part of the firmament, a very involved, engaged employer who was part of the British establishment. And so amongst the things that we did, for instance, we became a sponsor of the Hay Festival, which is the world's largest book festival. Bill Clinton described it as a Woodstock for the mind. So some of the best intellectuals, academics, media persons, influencers, celebrities from the world of cinema, all of them show up at the Hay Festival. And we felt that by being a sponsor there, the Tata name would start addressing those constituencies. We'd obviously do annual events at our head office at Tata Limited in London, where some of the British establishment, members of parliament, etc., would be invited. So when you're starting to build a brand, you have to identify the key stakeholder groups that you need to reach out to. You need to start by measuring, obviously, what their understanding of you as a group is, and then figure out what would be the best way to communicate the value proposition, who you are, what you stand for. And then you start investing in that. I can tell you it is very expensive trying to build and grow a brand globally. So we had to hold a lot of firepower to use it in relatively few events and in few sort of scenarios so that we could get maximum bang for the buck. But that's the way broadly we went about doing it. So long story short, brand was very powerful in India. We had to just make sure we continued to focus on the issues that people had learned to associate with us, our values, our social commitment. So we supported many of the campaigns which Indian companies like Tata Steel, Tata Tea, the Jaguar campaign, etc., were conducting. And overseas, we focused on really first educating our own employees and then trying to look at select constituencies, including key influencers, parliamentarians, members of the establishment, members of the media, educating them about who and what Tata was before we started doing bigger ticket sponsorships. We started with the Hay Festival, but there were many others that we had planned down the line.
Thank you so much, sir. I do understand that the value chain addition has to be there, and the brand positioning is something which is very, very important and very critical. My next question to you will be, there are companies that believe in outsourcing their brand management to an external agency, while others do it in-house. Which of the two do you think works better for a growing company? And what are the factors to be taken care of while outsourcing a company's brand custodianship?
So firstly, I don't think the brand custodianship itself can ever be outsourced. It has to be owned. The soul of the company, where it resides, is really within the company at the level of the promoter and the management. And that has to be completely owned inside the company. What you can outsource is obviously the functional competencies which may or may not exist in-house. So if you want to produce a house magazine, it's 50-50 whether you do it in-house or whether you completely outsource it, get a bunch of people to come in, do the right interviews, give them some ideas, and they'll put together a glossy publication for you. If you want your website to be managed, you can easily outsource it. But I think the heart of the brand, truly what you are, who you are as a company, what you stand for, that is something that has to be owned and directed by the top management of the company, and the promoters, the board have to have a say in what happens and the way in which the brand then gets communicated. And as I said earlier, your own employees are usually your biggest and best brand champions if they are convinced about your story. And therefore, a lot of investment is to be made in educating and creating awareness within your own workforce. And then it extends to your supply chain, your partners. So I think too few companies really invest in that. And it could make a huge difference if you did focus a lot on that. So I think the functional part, the sophistication of technical tools, a lot of that can be outsourced and you can get help where you need it. But the ownership of what has to be communicated, how it has to be communicated, the real story of your company is something that should never be outsourced. That should be owned by the top leadership and is entirely should be an in-house effort.
Thank you so much, sir. Going a little off topic, I would personally want to know who has been your idol and what is your motto of life? Also, how does your motto of life resonate with the vision of eCube?
Well, one idol that I've always sort of looked up to has been Mahatma Gandhi. And I often tell people that if you read his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments of Truth, you find an amazing person. He was a brilliant communicator. He was obviously an outstanding leader. But what I found most moving about that book is his willingness to engage with his own vulnerabilities, his frailties, his anxieties, and to be absolutely honest and candid. None of us is perfect. All of us are on learning journeys. And the way Gandhi could sort of demonstrate that he was as human as they come, but he could confront his personal issues and frailties and overcome many of those challenges and provide leadership to the mass of Indians and essentially eventually win us freedom. I think he's far and away, head and shoulders above anybody that I can certainly think of. There are many people that you admire and there are roles, activities where they do well. But all of us have some vulnerabilities, anxieties, issues. So I would caution that you should sort of put too many people on a pedestal because very often your role models then suddenly turn out to have feet of clay and then you become very sad. So have few icons, but lots of people that you can certainly admire and learn from. You asked about eCube and my view of life. As I said, now I'm at a point in life where I don't think I need to prove myself to anybody, but I'd like to enjoy deploying what I think I've learned and the experiences I've had. And thanks to Tata's and thanks to my early education and the doctorate I did at Oxford, I think the issues around global environmental protection, global warming in particular, and the concerns around corporate governance, these are things that fall very neatly into the ESG bucket. And so being able to play a role at eCube in helping companies with the benefit of whatever I've learned in my last 2.5 decades of professional career is something that gives me a great deal of satisfaction. And you mentioned I write from time to time. So I think being able to put down my thoughts, convey my feelings, views on issues, or even give interviews to the media and so on, these are things that I enjoy doing because it's a way of, in a sense, giving back from whatever I've learned. I'm still on a learning journey, incidentally, and I think that will never stop. You need to constantly invest in yourself, learn from others, and there'll always be sort of things, new ideas that you can work on and then communicate, and hopefully other people make them even better. So really looking forward to ways in which one can be helpful, but at the same time also the learning that one will go through oneself in the next maybe 2 or 3 decades of life.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much. Dr. Aarti, can you take over? Can you please unmute yourself?
Sorry, I got so engrossed listening to you. So, so we would, like we've seen the professional side of you and we've heard from you, and we're also quite inquisitive to know the person you are, how was it growing up in a family of an accomplished IPS officer along with such competitive siblings? Like we all know of your sibling, your brother, Mr. Raghuram Rajan, and you both are famously quoted as the EQ and the IQ brothers, So can you give us a little insight into your favorite moments of growing up with your brother and your other sibling?
Sure. So we are actually four siblings. So my eldest brother and sister are twins. Raghuram is the middle brother and I'm the youngest. So growing up in the Rajan household, because I was the youngest, I guess I was also the one that was most point. And my siblings always remind me that I could get away with a lot of mischief. I could get away with bunking school. I could get away with ridiculous explanations and excuses for not giving exams, while the rest of them had to really struggle and work very hard, particularly under a father who was a little bit of a disciplinarian, being from the police. But no, I think it was amazing. I think my mother was and has been a huge source of inspiration for all of us. She was a fairly unconventional woman, and she would push us all to sort of be better individuals, do better in our studies, better in sports. And at the same time, she was very sort of willing to accept the way you were sort of growing up. She didn't want to lay down the party line on what you had to do, with the friends you had to keep, and how you needed to behave. She would often tell me that, look, if you don't want to write your exams, you don't want to study hard, no problem. When you grow up, we'll buy you a cow and you can look after the cow like your namesake Krishna and be a cowherd. So there's no shame in something like that. So, you run your life the way you want to. And that sort of then that freedom to sort of grow up without too many constraints, and yet being occasionally reminded that there is more to life than just sort of having fun and playing games, and watching one sibling sort of do really well. Both my brothers went to IIT before me, for instance, and that then became a sort of spur for me to also study hard and get into IIT myself. So things like that, I think, again, very, very blessed. I've been very fortunate in the family I grew up in, the kinds of friends that I had, schools I went to, and often people say the grass is greener on the other side. But for me, I think the thing that I always look to with a lot of respect is no regrets. Everything that you've done has usually been for some purpose, some meaning, and very, very, very often later on in life is when you see how the dots sort of connect. I would never have thought when I was doing my doctoral dissertation that 25 years later, I'd come back to the issue of global warming and climate change and be writing books and working with some of the biggest financiers in the world and helping to address these challenges. So there's usually a meaning in everything you go through, the experiences you have, except that maybe at that point of time, you don't really understand it. So never sort of be envious, never think the grass is greener elsewhere. Everyone has their issues. As I said, the father of the nation, Gandhi, had his issues, and yet you can overcome them. There's so much to look forward to. So, no regrets policy, and keep learning and keep investing in yourself. So I've been very, very fortunate, very lucky with the family. And my parents, in fact, are both of them still alive. In fact, right now they're with me in this place in Kotagiri through the lockdown. So helping to keep them safe, and very blessed. So I keep counting my blessings every day.
How wonderful, sir. I've actually had the privilege to interact today with you and in the past with Dr. Raghuram Rajan. And you both have exceptional thoughts and experiences, and kudos to your parents for the upbringing, they've instilled in all your siblings. So please, my regards to them, like in this. We would like to continue asking a lot of questions, but Anna, I think there are a couple of questions in the chat box which we must take. So if you could have questions from the audience, please.
Sir, I'm quite elated. The conversation so far has been amazing. But with a crunch of time, I would now like to take some questions with the audience. The first question is from the director of Unity Group, Mrinal Mittal. The question is, when it comes to brands and companies with legacy, there is always a debate about David versus Goliath. How do you suggest much smaller or maybe regional companies compete with giants in terms of brand building?
I think smaller companies actually have huge advantages. The giants, I mean, it's exactly the point about Goliath. You're slow moving. You often have a lot of historical baggage. There are legacy issues that you find difficult to overcome. And the advantage that the Davids of the world have, the newcomers or the smaller brands or regional brands, is really that sometimes they are much more familiar with their marketplace and able to move much more swiftly in offering products and services that really make a difference to the end consumer. So I think if you're thinking about brand building, the basics of brand building will not change whether you're large or small, but your ability to take tactical advantage of situations, of developing scenarios at a local level is much greater if you're a David rather than a Goliath. But ultimately, going back to the essence of any brand, you have to be authentic. You have to speak to who you are and what you stand for. It has to be linked to your mission and core purpose. And it has to be linked to a vision that you set for yourself. As a small entity, your vision may be a little bit more modest than a group like Tata's, which wants to be amongst the 25 most admired brands in the world. But it doesn't stop you from having something that is still relevant to you, relevant to the industry in which you operate, and relevant to the kind of customer base you're building up. So I would sort of say that as a David, you actually have the best of both worlds. You certainly do whatever is right for building your brand, but you can move much more nimbly and much swifter than the big boys. So I think you actually have more advantages than the Goliaths of the world.
So the next question to you is, how do you go about identifying companies to invest in eCube? And do you also focus, how do you also focus on profits simultaneously?
So I think there is a tremendous amount of research that has been done to show that a focus on ESG, environment, social, and governance, actually delivers much higher shareholder and stakeholder returns. Companies that don't focus so much on ESG actually tend to deliver poorer returns. If you look at the Indian market, there is an MSCI ESG Leaders Index. And from the time it was first conceptualized in 2008-9 till the current year, both for the entire period, for the last 10 years, for the last 5 years, for the last 3 years, and for the last 1 year, that ESG index has outperformed the Sensex. So that gives you a sense of the fact that ESG leaders, companies that focus on ESG tend to do better than their peer set. So what we are trying to do at eCube is really identify promoters and companies that are committed to doing better on ESG and where we can offer some help and support. And really those are the kinds of companies that we want to back, where there is a transparency, a willingness to engage, a genuine commitment, what we call promoter intent to perform better. And then there can be a partnership between eCube and those companies.
Okay. Now I think I'll just take the last question, sir. Would it be correct to state that the brand of the company has to be perfectly aligned with the culture of the company? And if yes, how so?
I think it is very important that the brand and the culture are sort of aligned because that's when people start sensing that there is authenticity to the brand. If you have a brand that is very different from the actual culture of the organization, people start seeing through it. And then once they get a sense of discomfort that this doesn't look authentic, or these people are claiming stuff that when you talk to their employees is certainly not the case, then they start distrusting. And if distrust creeps in, it's very hard to shake it off. Because in particular in today's world where messages go viral, communications go viral, I think the word gets around very fast. So you can't bluff your way to a powerful brand just by pretending that you're all the things that your brand image would like to suggest if there isn't a core value that is demonstrable and that people can link to. So you've had many cases of companies that will turn out rotten products or offer awful customer service, but will still be there on television propagating a very proud brand. And then over time, those are the brands that decline the fastest because people start seeing that there's dissonance between what is claimed and the reality. And I think we should all assume that with the kind of active, informed stakeholders you have today, whether it is shareholders, whether it is investors, whether it is customers, you can't hide the truth for very long. So you better make sure that your products and services live up to the brand promise. If they don't, then it's better to yank any communication until you fix the problem and then go back to the public by communicating who you are and what you stand for.
Absolutely, sir. This is so true. I've seen that in so many cases and case studies that I've gone through myself personally. And day in, day out, when we go through the Economic Times articles, and this is something which is happening. Many companies create a bubble brand building and bubble reputation from themselves. And because of the lack of quality in their product and sustainability, they end up failing. My last question to you, sir, is what is your advice to young aspirants who want to be a corporate leader and to the senior professionals who want to sustain, grow, and remain relevant in this dynamic world?
I think two things that I'll say that, besides all the usual stuff about working hard and so on, but two things. You have to keep investing in yourself in terms of continuous learning. I think the world is dramatically changed. There is no business, no profession, no industry today which is not challenged with possibilities for the future that look very different from what you have today. So you have to constantly invest in learning. I think the day you give up learning is the day you're likely to be finished as a business leader. So whether you're young or whether you're a senior manager or a very experienced professional, you have to keep investing in yourself and in continuous learning. The second, particularly for younger people, is risk-taking. I think you have to be willing to put yourself out there in situations that may be uncomfortable, in learning environments that may seem difficult, but where you can gain so much that will stand you good straight for the rest of your years. If you take the easy way out and go into a sort of tried and tested route of sort of career growth, there'll be many experiences you may miss out on, and you'd probably not be pushing your leadership instincts as well or as much as you otherwise might. So I think you should sort of step out of your comfort zone, look for new opportunities to learn something different, and really to test yourself against significant challenges. And the earlier you can do that in your life, the more equipped you will be later in life when many leadership positions become available more easily to really be a champion leader of a very big, large, complex organization. So take those chances early on in your life. Don't settle for the easy options and constantly test yourself. I think those will be the true hallmarks of somebody who wants to become a genuine and admired leader.
Thank you, sir. It was quite an enlightening message because I'm very sure many of my ISB colleagues who have joined here with us will be able to relate since most of us belong from a family background, family business background, and where the risk taking is more like a cumulative effort. Thank you so much for addressing all the questions today, sir. I see a lot of questions still in my private chat box, some of which are really good questions, but I really apologize since we are short of time and cannot take any further questions. I would now like to invite FICCI Flow Kanpur Chapter's chairperson, Dr. Aarti Gupta, to wind up this event with a vote of thanks and felicitate our guest, Dr. Mukund Rajan, with the Green Certificate. Thank you everyone for your presence here. A special thanks to Dr. Mukund Rajan from my side. Dr. Aarti, can you please take over this event now? Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Arna. Thank you, Dr. Rajan. It has been an absolute delight hearing you. Your knowledge and experiences are unparalleled. But what really inspired me is, how humble you are and the limitless learning attitude you approach life with, So thank you so much for sharing that with us and showing that side of you to us today. On behalf of everyone at Flow Kanpur and everyone joining us today, I would once again like to thank you. At Flow Kanpur, we believe in honoring our guests by planting a tree in your name in the forest of Sundarbans. So since environment is so close to you, I hope you will appreciate this little gesture on our behalf. And you can track that tree with the certificate number and you can see how it grows and fondly remember us at Flow Kanpur. I would also
Thank you so much.
So we'll send you the certificate along with the memento once the COVID situation improves and we can actually have it reach to you. But I would like to thank everyone who joined us today and from all different spheres, from Flow, FICCI, from all the chapters, from Thai UP, some of Arna shared it with ISP friends. So everyone who joined us here, thank you so much for your time and your questions. I would like to thank our sponsors for Flow Kanpur, Balancia Corp, Lohia Corp, and Balancia Socks, Lohia Corp, and Art Denox. Thank you so much. And everyone stay home, stay safe, and see you soon.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone. Stay home, stay safe, as Aarti just said.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Rajan. It was such a
Thank you.